The glass of the observation port is thick, cold, and forged to withstand the crushing indifference of a vacuum, yet it feels like the thinnest of veils between a soul and the end of all things. Behind this transparent barrier, the homeworld does not simply shrink, it undergoes a slow, agonizing transmutation. The vibrant cobalt of the Pacific and the deep mossy emeralds of the Amazonian basin begin to bleed together, losing their distinct borders as the atmosphere, that fragile glowing ribbon of azure, tapers into a ghostly haze. The familiar features of continents, once the stage for every war, every love and every triumph in the history of the species, dissolve into a singular shimmering point of light. It is a sapphire suspended in a velvet throat, a solitary spark of warmth in a desert that knows no end. The departure is marked not by a sense of movement, but by a profound and unsettling transition of the senses. Below, in the heavy air of the planet, the world was a cacophony of life, the rustle of leaves, the rhythmic crashing of tides, the constant low-frequency hum of a civilization that never sleeps. Here, beyond the final wisps of the exosphere, those sounds do not just fade, they cease to exist. Sound requires a medium, a dance of molecules to carry the message of a vibration, but in the void, there is no air to tremble. The silence that rushes in to fill the void is not the mere absence of noise. It is a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating weight that presses against the inner ear. It is the sound of absolute zero, the sound of the universe holding its breath. Within the confines of the vessel, the only remaining heartbeat is the mechanical ticking of a clock. It is a rhythmic metallic pulse, a steady click, click, click that serves as the only anchor to the reality of the passage of time. In the absence of a rising sun or a falling moon, this artificial metronome becomes the supreme arbiter of existence. It reminds the traveller that while the ship may be hurtling through the dark at tens of thousands of kilometres per hour, the scale of the surroundings has rendered such speeds irrelevant. The clock does not measure progress across a map. It measures the slow decay of a human life against the backdrop of the eternal. This is the fundamental revelation of the deep. Distance in the cosmos is a lie. We have spent our history measuring the world in paces, in miles, and in kilometres, but these are the units of a creature bound to the soil. Once the gravity of the homeworld is severed, space reveals its true nature as an ocean of time. To look out at the stars is not to look across a field, but to look back through the layers of history. To reach even the nearest of our celestial neighbours is not a matter of traversing a gap, but of enduring a duration. The void is so vast that light itself, the fastest messenger in the existence of all things, becomes a sluggish, crawling thing. The speed of light, capped at nearly 300,000 kilometres per second, is the ultimate speed limit of the universe, yet when applied to the gulfs between the worlds, it feels like a cruel joke. Even at this blistering pace, a photon takes over 1 full second just to reach the moon. It takes 8 minutes and 20 seconds to bridge the gap from the sun to the Earth. To reach the outer edges of our own solar system, that same light must travel for hours, and to reach the nearest star it must labour through the dark for over 4 years. For a human being, composed of fragile carbon and fleeting memories, these stretches of time are not mere numbers. They are barriers of mortality. The abyss does not care for the urgency of a human heart. It is a yawning chasm of the non-existent, a place where the laws of physics are the only lords. As the Earth recedes until it is indistinguishable from the stars that surround it, the traveller realises that they are no longer moving through a place, but through a sequence of years. The struggle is no longer against the resistance of the air or the pull of the Earth, but against the limitations of the light itself. We are a species that has learned to conquer the horizon, yet we now face a horizon that recedes as fast as we approach it. The weight of this realization is the true burden of the explorer. To leave the homeworld is to accept that you're becoming a ghost, a remnant of a time and place that continues to age and change in your absence. While the clock on the wall ticks away the seconds of the journey, years may pass in the world that was left behind. The void stretches the bonds of causality until they are thin and translucent. We are embarking on a journey where the destination is so far removed that the version of us that arrives will not be the version of us that departed. The abyss is not empty. it is filled with the terrifying silent pressure of the eons. As the last traces of the Earth's warmth fade from the hull, the ship enters the true dark. The stars do not twinkle here. They are cold, steady needles of light that pierce the blackness without offering any heat. They are the distant markers of a journey that will outlast the metal of the ship and the flesh of the crew. The story of our expansion into the heavens is not a story of maps and territories, but a chronicle of our struggle to remain relevant in a universe that measures its life in billions of years. We are moving into the deep, and the only thing we have brought with us to combat the infinite is the steady, defiant ticking of a clock, counting down the moments until we are either reclaimed by the dust or transformed by the light. Before the first clock was ever forged by human hands, the sky itself served as the primary chronometer for a species waking up to the mystery of existence. To the early watchers of the night, the heavens were not an infinite graveyard of cold matter, but a low, intimate ceiling draped in a tapestry of myths. The stars were fixed jewels, and among them moved 5 bright wanderers, the planets, tracing paths that seemed governed by the whims of deities. In this infancy of understanding, the distance to these lights was perceived as something almost tactile. There was a lingering belief that if one could only build a ladder of sufficient height, or scale the peak of the tallest mountain, they might reach out and brush the surface of the moon, or pluck a wandering star from its course. The universe was a room, small and bounded, where humanity sat at the very centre, the focus of a divine and watchful gaze. This sense of cosmic intimacy provided a profound psychological comfort. To live in a small universe is to live in a home where everything has a place and a purpose. The ancient maps of the sky reflected this order, depicting the Earth as a stationary anchor around which the sun, the moon, and the planets performed a complex and beautiful dance. This was the geocentric reality, a world where the horizon was the limit of all things, and the void was a concept yet to be birthed. The measurements of the day were human measurements, the length of a stride, the span of a day's journey by horse, and it was assumed that the heavens operated on a similar manageable scale. The idea that a vast silent gulf of millions of miles separated the Earth from the glowing embers of the planets was not just unknown, it was unthinkable. The first cracks in this cosy celestial shell appeared through the power of geometry, wielded by minds that looked at the sky not for stories, but for ratios. 3 centuries before the Common Era, on the island of Samos, a mathematician named Aristarchus began to dismantle the walls of the ancient room. He did not possess telescopes or advanced sensors. He possessed only the logic of shadows and the patience to observe the subtle shifts of light. By studying the curve of the Earth's shadow as it fell across the face of the moon during an eclipse, Aristarchus realized that the world beneath his feet was a sphere of significant size, but it was his observation of the moon at its first and third quarters that changed everything. Aristarchus understood that when the moon appears exactly half illuminated to an observer on Earth, the moon, and the sun must form a perfect right-angled triangle. By measuring the angle between the moon and the sun at this precise moment, he attempted to calculate the relative distances between these 3 celestial bodies. Though his instruments were primitive and his final figures were modest by modern standards, his conclusion was revolutionary. The sun was not a small lamp hanging just above the clouds, but a gargantuan furnace located at a staggering distance from the Earth. He proposed that the sun was 18 to 20 times more distant than the moon, and that it was many times larger than the terrestrial globe. In a single stroke of geometric insight, the sun was moved from its role as a subservient light to the central pillar of the system, and the Earth was relegated to a satellite spinning through a space that had suddenly and terrifyingly expanded. This revelation was the first true encounter with the scale of the abyss. If the sun was so far away, and yet still appeared as a brilliant disk in the sky, the true volume of the solar system was hundreds of thousands of times larger than any human had ever dared to dream. The psychological sanctuary of the small universe began to crumble. The stars, which had once been seen as lanterns on a nearby dome, were now suspected to be distant suns, separated from us by gaps so wide that the human mind struggled to find a metaphor for them. The cosy room had become a sprawling, empty cathedral, and humanity was no longer the master of the house, but a microscopic inhabitant of a mote of dust drifting through a sunbeam. Despite the brilliance of Aristarchus, the old comforts of the centered universe lingered for nearly 2,000 years. The system of Ptolemy, with its nested crystal spheres and intricate epicycles, offered a sense of mathematical elegance that kept the void at bay. In this model, the planets were carried on transparent shells, moving in perfect circles within circles. It was a clockwork universe that functioned with the precision of a jeweler's masterpiece. To the medieval mind, this was a source of profound security. The heavens were ordered, the earth was fixed, and the distance to the stars was finite. There was no vacuum in this world. The space between the spheres was filled with ether, a quintessence that connected the terrestrial to the divine. But as the centuries turned, the observations grew more precise, and the old geometry could no longer contain the reality of the wandering lights. The invention of the telescope and the rigorous calculations of the Renaissance began to strip away the crystal spheres one by one. The realization that the planets were not divine entities but physical worlds, with mountains, moons, and atmospheres of their own, forced a final confrontation with the scale of the heavens. The transition from the small centered universe to the vast decentralized cosmos was not merely a scientific shift, it was a spiritual exile. We were discovering that the heavens were not a place built for us, but a wilderness of staggering proportions. By the time the great astronomers of the 17th century began to map the orbits of the planets with newfound accuracy, the true geometry of the heavens was finally coming into focus. They saw that the gaps between the worlds were not filled with ether, but with a profound and chilling emptiness. The distance to the sun was refined from the modest estimates of the ancients to a figure that reached into the tens of millions of miles. The ladder that humanity had once hoped to climb to reach the stars had been kicked away, leaving us standing on the shore of a dark ocean that stretched out toward an eternal horizon. The struggle to bridge these distances would define the next era of our history, as we began to understand that to travel through space is to surrender oneself to the immense, unyielding passage of time. This surrender began in earnest in the year 1672, when the walls of the cosmic room were finally pushed back by the power of simultaneous observation. In the stone-quiet halls of the Paris Observatory, Giovanni Domenico Cassini looked toward the red spark of Mars, while thousands of miles away, in the sweltering humidity of Cayenne, French Guiana, his colleague Jean Richet did the same. They were separated by a vast portion of the Earth's curve, yet they were linked by a single, synchronized intent: to measure the subtle shift of the planet against the backdrop of the distant stars. This was the parallax experiment, a geometric pincer movement designed to trap the true scale of the solar system. When the data from the two hemispheres was finally combined, the result was a mathematical earthquake. The distance to Mars, and by extension the distance to the Sun, was revealed to be millions of miles greater than even the most daring astronomers had hypothesized. Cassini's calculations placed the Sun roughly 87 million miles away from the Earth, a figure that, while slightly short of the true 93 million, was close enough to shatter the old world forever. In an instant, the universe ceased to be a cozy, manageable space and became a sprawling, empty cathedral of terrifying proportions. If the Sun was that far away, then the planets were not neighbours just across a narrow fence. They were solitary islands lost in a gargantuan sea. The Earth was no longer the centrepiece of a grand stage, but a mere speck of dust caught in a shaft of light within a dark, monumental nave. This discovery fundamentally altered the human relationship with the concept of travel. Our ancestors had long misjudged the time required for celestial voyages because they could not yet fathom the absolute nature of the vacuum. In the centuries preceding this realization, it was often assumed that the space between worlds was filled with some form of thin air or a mystical ether that might support the wings of a craft or the sails of a ship. They envisioned the journey to the Moon or Mars as an extension of a sea voyage, perhaps longer and more arduous, but still operating within the familiar logic of terrestrial movement. They did not understand that space is not just a place where air is missing. It is a place where the very friction of existence is stripped away, leaving nothing but the cold, hard mathematics of momentum and the crushing weight of duration. Because they did not understand the vacuum, they could not conceive of the sheer emptiness that defines the solar system. In a cathedral of such size, the planets occupy less than a billionth of the available volume. To move from one to another is not to travel across a landscape, but to launch oneself into a void so absolute that for months or years there is nothing to see, nothing to touch, and nothing to breathe. The realization dawned that the heavens were not a destination to be reached, but a desert to be endured. The distance was so vast that any hope of a quick crossing was an illusion born of ignorance. We were beginning to see that space is, in reality, an ocean of time that must be crossed with the patience of a saint and the endurance of a machine. This ocean of time is the most daunting barrier to our species. On Earth, we are used to the idea that more power or more speed can conquer any distance. We built faster horses, then steam engines, then jet turbines, always shrinking the world until every point on the globe was only hours away. But the scale revealed by Cassini and his successors showed that even our most frantic speeds are nothing when measured against the abyss. If a traveller were to set out for the sun at the speed of a galloping horse, the journey would take over 500 years. Even a modern jet flying day and night without pause would require nearly 2 decades to reach that distant furnace. The sheer physical gap is so immense that the human lifespan becomes the primary limiting factor of exploration. As we grasped the true geometry of the heavens, we also began to understand the silence of the void. In the old small universe, the stars and planets were close enough to feel like part of our world, their movements tied to our seasons and our fates. But in the sprawling cathedral of the true cosmos, that connection was severed. The planets are millions of miles apart, and the stars are trillions more beyond them. We are separated from our neighbours by stretches of nothingness so profound that the very concept of proximity becomes a mockery. To look out at the red glow of Mars or the golden rings of Saturn is to look across a gulf that defies the senses. The transition from the cosy room to the infinite cathedral was the end of our cosmic childhood. We were forced to accept that we are small, that the universe is large, and that the gaps between us are not merely empty space, but vast, unyielding reservoirs of time. Every mission we would eventually launch, every probe we would send into the dark would have to be designed to survive not just the radiation and the cold, but the sheer agonizing length of the journey. We had found the true measure of our prison, and we realized that to escape it, we would have to learn a new kind of patience, a patience that spans generations and accepts the silence of the deep as the only soundtrack to our survival. We were no longer just observers of the lights. We were mariners preparing to set sail upon an ocean where the shore is a memory and the horizon is a lifetime away. The first step into this dark ocean is a mere hop across a narrow strait, a journey to the bone-white sentinel that has orbited our world since the dawn of the solar system. The moon is our tiny porch in the cosmos, a celestial stepping stone that remains, by the sheer grace of orbital mechanics, within the reach of a human lifespan and a modest supply of oxygen. To cross the gap between the Earth and its solitary satellite is a voyage that spans roughly 3 days, a duration that feels profoundly, almost comfortingly human. It is the length of a long weekend, the time it takes for a storm to pass, or for a traveller to cross a continent by rail. In these 72 hours of transit, the umbilical cord to the homeworld is stretched, but it does not yet feel as though it has been severed. This 3-day leap is the only part of the cosmic journey that fits within the biological rhythms of our species. A person can endure 3 days of cramped quarters and recycled air with the knowledge that the destination is already visible through the window, a massive cratered face growing larger with every passing hour. At a distance of approximately 238,900 miles, the moon is close enough that light itself only requires 1.3 seconds to bridge the divide. A conversation between a lunar explorer and a technician on Earth carries only a slight rhythmic pause, a brief hesitation that allows for the preservation of intimacy. This is the only place in the universe where we can stand on another world and still feel the immediate presence of our own. When viewed against the backdrop of the wider solar system, the proximity of the moon is a staggering anomaly. If the Earth were reduced to the size of a standard basketball, the moon would be a small tennis ball located roughly 30 feet away. In this scaled-down model, a human could walk from one to the other in a few seconds. But to reach the next nearest port of call, the red deserts of Mars, that same traveller would have to walk for several miles. To reach the gas giants of the outer realm, they would have to trek across entire states. The moon is not merely close, it is practically touching us, a part of our immediate gravitational household that serves as a deceptive introduction to the art of spaceflight. Because the journey is so brief, the moon does not demand the total surrender of one's earthly identity. From the lunar surface, the Earth does not appear as a distant anonymous star, but as a magnificent swirling marble of sapphire and cloud, hanging 4 times larger in the sky than the moon appears to us. It is a constant looming reminder of where we come from, providing a psychological anchor that prevents the soul from drifting into the true abyss. The 3 days spent in transit are a period of transition, a final moment of grace where the familiar blue horizon is still a physical presence rather than a fading memory. We call this a voyage, but in the grand geometry of the heavens, it is more akin to stepping out of the front door and lingering for a moment on the welcome mat. Yet, even this short distance reveals the harsh reality of the vacuum. The 3-day transit requires a precise dance of physics, a violent acceleration to escape the Earth's gravity, followed by a long, silent coast through the dark. There is no weather in this gap, no change in the light, and no sound other than the internal hum of the spacecraft. The traveller begins to sense the profound isolation that defines the cosmos, even while the homeworld still dominates the view. The moon serves as a warning, a silent testament to the fact that beyond our atmosphere, there is nothing to sustain life but the technology we carry with us. It is a beautiful, barren desert that offers no water, no air, and no protection from the relentless radiation of the sun. As the spacecraft enters lunar orbit and the grey battered landscape rises to meet the traveller, the scale of the porch is finally understood. Even this closest neighbour is a world of absolute desolation, a place where time is measured in billions of years of geological stillness. The 3 days of travel have brought the explorer to a place that has not changed since the first primitive organisms crawled out of the Earth's oceans. The moon is a museum of the solar system's violent youth, preserved in the airless dark. It is the boundary line between the world of the living and the world of the eternal. To stand on the moon is to realize that we have barely begun to walk. We have mastered the 3-day journey, and we have learned to survive the brief transit to our satellite, but the wilderness that lies beyond the moon is of a different order of magnitude entirely. The gap between the Earth and the moon is a fraction of a percent of the distance to the nearest planet. Once we turn our backs on this bone-coloured sentinel and look out toward the red spark of Mars or the golden glow of Saturn, the 3-day leap is revealed for what it truly is, a final moment of safety before we commit ourselves to the months and years of the deep. The porch is small, the light of the homeworld is still bright, but the door is now open to a void that will demand everything we are and everything we may become. We are standing on the edge of the true wilderness, and the clock is beginning to count the long, lonely months of the first true crossing. The transition from the lunar porch to the inner reaches of the solar system requires a fundamental surrender of the terrestrial intuition that a straight line is the shortest path between 2 points. In the airless theatre of the deep, a straight line is a geometric ghost, an impossibility rendered void by the titanic gravitational presence of the sun. To attempt a direct linear flight to a neighbouring world would require an energy source of such impossible magnitude that it would dwarf the power of the stars themselves. Instead, the traveller must become a creature of the curve, a captive of the Hohmann transfer orbit. This is the subtle art of celestial navigation, where speed is less important than timing, and the journey is defined by a long elliptical fall through the silence. The sun acts as a massive gravitational anchor, a well so deep that every object within its reach is forever spiralling toward its core. To reach the inner worlds, a spacecraft does not simply fly. It sheds its orbital momentum, intentionally slowing its pace so that the sun's gravity can pull it inward. This is the geometry of the transfer orbit, a graceful, sweeping arc that connects the orbit of the Earth to the orbit of the destination. It is a path of least resistance, a cosmic slide where the engines are fired only twice, once to break away from the home world and once to settle into the embrace of the target. Between these 2 moments of fire lies a vast, echoing expanse of months, where the crew is nothing more than a group of passengers on a silent, unpowered projectile. The journey to Venus, the shimmering sister of the Earth, is a descent into a tightening spiral of heat and light. While the Moon was a 3-day leap, Venus requires a commitment of roughly 4 months, 120 days of drifting through a void that grows increasingly hostile with every passing week. As the craft moves inward, the sun begins to swell in the observation ports, its light transforming from a gentle warmth into a fierce, unrelenting glare. The traveller is no longer moving through the cold dark, but through the invisible currents of the solar wind, a torrential stream of charged particles screaming outward from the solar corona at millions of miles per hour. The ship becomes a leaf caught in a gale of radiation, its hull bombarded by a relentless, silent rain of protons and electrons. During these 4 months, the concept of time undergoes a slow, agonizing stretching. On Earth, 4 months is a season. It is the time it takes for spring to turn to summer, for a crop to grow and be harvested. Inside the metal skin of the spacecraft, however, there is no change in the weather, no shifting of the shadows, and no sound of rain. There is only the hum of the life support systems and the steady, indifferent ticking of the clock. The crew must master the physics of patience, understanding that they cannot hurry the orbit. They are bound by the laws of Kepler and Newton, moving at the precise speed dictated by their distance from the Sun. To try and arrive sooner would require burning fuel that does not exist. To arrive later would be to miss the planet entirely and drift forever into the fire. Venus itself remains a deceptive target for much of the journey. For the first 2 months, it is merely a brilliant, unblinking point of light, indistinguishable from a star except for its steady, unwavering glow. But as the 3rd month gives way to the 4th, the planet begins to resolve into a disk, a world shrouded in a thick, impenetrable veil of sulfuric acid clouds. The descent toward Venus is not a homecoming, but a journey into a hellish furnace. The closer the ship gets, the more the sun dominates the sky, a gargantuan eye that watches the tiny intruder with a blinding white-hot intensity. The light here is twice as powerful as it is on Earth, a raw and primal energy that threatens to cook the very electronics that keep the crew alive. The geometry of momentum dictates that, as the craft falls toward the sun, it gains speed, hurtling toward the encounter with a velocity that would shatter any terrestrial vehicle. To enter orbit around Venus, the ship must perform a violent retrograde burn, firing its engines against the direction of travel to bleed off the energy gained during the 4-month fall. It is a moment of extreme tension, where months of silent drifting culminate in a few minutes of bone-jarring acceleration. If the engines fail, the craft will skip off the atmosphere like a stone on a pond, flung back out into the void, on a trajectory that leads only to the heart of the sun. This first true crossing of the inner system serves as a brutal education in the scale of the void. Even a world as close as Venus requires a duration that tests the limits of human endurance. The 4-month drift is a period of profound isolation, where the Earth has shrunk to a bright blue star, and the destination is a world of crushing pressure and lethal heat. The traveller learns that to move between the planets is to exist in a state of perpetual waiting, a prisoner of the very gravity that makes the journey possible. We are learning to navigate the invisible architecture of the Sun's domain, but as we look past the clouds of Venus toward the red horizon of Mars, we realise that the ocean of time is only getting deeper, and the requirements of patience are only beginning to grow. The red siren of the inner system Mars demands a tribute not just in fuel and fire, but in the very marrow of the human spirit. To cast oneself toward the 4th world is to commit to a grueling odyssey of 7 to 9 months, a duration that stretches the limits of terrestrial sanity. This is no longer a brief excursion or a seasonal drift. It is a siege against the infinite. As the engines fall silent after the initial thrust, the crew enters a state of suspended existence, trapped within a pressurized metal hull that feels smaller with every passing million miles. The vacuum outside is absolute, a cold and hungry ghost that gnaws at the seals of the ship, while inside the air is a recycled, sterile ghost of the atmosphere left behind. In the first weeks of the transit, the Earth remains a presence, a magnificent and reassuring sphere of life that still shows the familiar patterns of weather and sea. But as the second month bleeds into the third, a terrifying transformation occurs. The home world ceases to be a place and becomes a coordinate. It shrinks from a world into a disk, then from a disk into a brilliant blue star, and finally into a mere pinprick of light that is easily lost among the myriad diamonds of the Milky Way. This is the moment when the psychological anchor finally snaps. To look out the window and be unable to distinguish one's home from the cold indifference of the distant stars is to experience a loneliness that has no name in any human tongue. The umbilical cord of light and radio waves remains, but the signal now takes minutes to travel the gap, turning every conversation into a haunting echo of the past. The human mind is not forged for this level of isolation. Deprived of the rhythmic cycles of the seasons, the smell of rain, and the shifting colours of the sky, the spirit begins to fray. The interior of the ship becomes a world unto itself, a claustrophobic labyrinth of white plastic, humming electronics, and the rhythmic throb of pumps. The crew members, once colleagues and friends, become mirrors of each other's mounting despair. Every habit becomes an irritation, every whispered word a potential spark for conflict. The silence of the void outside is mirrored by a growing silence within, as the travellers retreat into the private fortresses of their own minds to escape the crushing monotony of the voyage. While the Earth withers into a memory, Mars looms ahead as a distant, unblinking eye. It is a rust-coloured spark that refuses to grow, mocking the travellers with its perceived immobility. For months, it remains a tiny, blood-red dot, a siren that calls them forward into the dark but offers no promise of a warm welcome. The red planet is a world of dust and bone, a place where the wind screams through canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon and over volcanoes 3 times the height of Everest. Yet from the perspective of the approaching ship, it is merely a target in a mathematical equation. The crew must watch this unmoving eye day after day, week after week, as they fall through the gravity well of the sun, their destination a constant reminder of the bridge they have burned behind them. The erosion of the spirit is a slow, methodical process. The lack of gravity causes the body to soften, the bones to leach their calcium, and the heart to shrink, as if the physical form is attempting to match the emptiness of the surroundings. The senses are starved. The only flavours are those of preserved rations, the only sounds are the artificial whirs of the machine, and the only touch is the cold surface of metal. The travellers become ghosts in a ghost ship, moving through a twilight existence where the passage of time is marked only by the digital flicker of the mission clock. They are the first humans to truly understand the scale of the cathedral, to feel the weight of the millions of miles that now separate them from the only cradle their species has ever known. As the 7th month approaches, the red eye finally begins to dilate. The spark expands into a sphere, and the features of the Martian landscape, the vast scar of the Valle Marineris and the dark, dusty plains, begin to resolve through the haze of the thin atmosphere. But this proximity does not bring immediate relief. Instead, it brings a new kind of terror. The ship is hurtling toward the planet at speeds that defy the imagination, and the crew must now prepare for the violent transition from the silence of the void to the chaos of entry. They are exhausted, their spirits weathered by the long dark, yet they must summon the will to face a world that is fundamentally hostile to their existence. The journey to Mars is the ultimate test of the human capacity for patience. It is a period of profound vulnerability where the traveller is entirely at the mercy of the laws of motion and the integrity of their life support. To reach the red siren is to have survived a psychological winter that lasts nearly a year, a journey through a desert of time where the only landmarks are the fading light of home and the growing glare of a new alien sun. We are no longer creatures of the earth. We are the children of the vacuum, forged in the fires of isolation and tempered by the cold reality of the deep. The red planet is now a physical reality, a shore at the end of a long and lonely sea, but the price of the crossing has been written in the very souls of those who dared to make it. The traveller, having left the gravitational influence of the red planet, enters a region of space that exists in the popular mind as a chaotic swarm of tumbling stones, a dense thicket of debris where a pilot must weave and dodge through a storm of granite. But the reality of the asteroid belt is far more haunting and far more lonely. It is not a crowded field, but a vast, silent graveyard of failed worlds, a region of such immense volume that one could spend a lifetime drifting through its heart and never see a single rock with the naked eye. The distance between any two significant asteroids is, on average, over 600,000 miles, more than twice the distance between the Earth and the Moon. It is a desert of debris, an ossuary of the solar system where the silence of the inner system deepens into a profound, echoing stillness. This is the realm of the shattered and the unformed, a transition zone that separates the small, rocky inner worlds from the gargantuan territories of the outer giants. Billions of years ago, the titanic gravitational influence of Jupiter acted as a cosmic disruptor, a heavy hand that reached across the void and prevented the formation of a fifth rocky planet. The material that should have coalesced into a world of mountains, oceans, and perhaps life was instead kept in a state of eternal fragmentation. The belt is a collection of ghosts, Ceres, the dwarf queen of this realm, a sphere of ice and rock that holds nearly 1/3 of the belt's entire mass. Vesta, a battered protoplanet with a central peak twice the height of the tallest mountain on Earth, and countless millions of smaller fragments, ranging from the size of a great city to the size of a grain of sand. They are the remnants of a planetary birth that was strangled in its cradle, a testament to the violent and indifferent forces that shaped our corner of the galaxy. To cross this region is to commit to another several months of navigation through the long dark. The ship moves through a landscape of nothingness, where the only landmarks are the mathematical coordinates of the stars. In this graveyard, the sun begins to lose its dominance. Behind the traveller, the inner rocky worlds, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, become a cluster of fading sparks, huddled close to the solar fire for warmth. Ahead lies the realm of the giants, a territory of scale so vast that the entire inner system seems like a small, well-lit room in a dark and mountainous castle. The transit of the belt is a period of extreme sensory deprivation. There is no atmosphere to scatter the light, no clouds to mark the passing of the hours, and no horizons to provide a sense of scale. The traveller is suspended in a state of perpetual between, moving through the wreckage of a world that never was. The silence in this graveyard is different from the silence of the inner system. In the inner system, the solar wind is a constant energetic presence, and the proximity of the planets provides a sense of celestial activity. But here, in the gap between Mars and Jupiter, the solar wind begins to thin and cool. The traveller is moving into the shadows. The only sound is the internal heartbeat of the ship, the rhythmic throb of the pumps and the low hum of the processors, a constant reminder of the fragile bubble of life that is currently trespassing in a realm of absolute death. The asteroids themselves are invisible, cold, and dark, moving in their own slow, ancient orbits. They are the silent sentinels of the gap, and the ship passes among them like a ghost through the ruins of a forgotten civilization. As the months of the belt transit draw to a close, the character of the journey undergoes a fundamental shift. The traveller is no longer a creature of the warmth. The sun has shrunk until it is no longer a disk that can be felt on the skin, but a brilliant, piercing needle of light that offers no comfort and casts long, stark shadows. The transition is complete. The inner rocky worlds, with their solid ground and familiar skies, are now a distant memory, a story told to children. The ship is entering the territory of the gas giants, where the laws of scale are rewritten, and the very concept of a planet takes on a terrifying new meaning. The first of these, Jupiter, begins to assert its presence. It does not yet appear as a visible world, but as a gravitational tug, a subtle, invisible change in the ship's momentum that signals the end of the graveyard and the beginning of the kingdom of the giants. The traveller feels the weight of the king of planets long before they see its banded face. The silence of the belt is replaced by the mounting tension of an encounter with a world so massive it could swallow all the other planets combined. We are leaving the ruins of the failed world behind, moving out of the sunlight and into the deep, cold majesty of the outer system, where time is measured not in months, but in the long, slow years of a Jovian winter. The threshold has been crossed, and the true scale of the void is finally beginning to reveal itself. The King of Planets does not merely occupy space, it commands it with a gravitational authority that bends the very fabric of the solar system. To reach this gargantuan sovereign, a traveller must commit to a period of endurance that defies the fleeting nature of human ambition. Current robotic voyagers, launched from the distant warmth of the Earth, must labour through the dark for 6 to 8 years before they even catch the first true glimpse of the Jovian clouds. This is a span of time in which an entire generation of technology can become obsolete, where the engineers who designed the craft may have moved on to other lives, and where the silence of the void becomes the only constant. For nearly a decade, the machine must survive the absolute zero of the vacuum, its electronic heart beating in a rhythmic, lonely pulse, while the sun fades into a mere memory. The arrival at the Jovian threshold is not a moment of peace, but a confrontation with a shimmering, invisible shroud of death. Jupiter's magnetic field is a monstrous engine, a spinning dynamo that traps charged particles and accelerates them to speeds that approach the velocity of light. For a human-made craft, entering this environment is akin to walking into a continuous, high-energy storm of microscopic needles. This radiation scours the hull, degrades the silicon of the processors, and threatens to erase the very memory of the machine. It is a testament to the resilience of our creations that they can function at all in a place where the magnetic pressure is millions of times stronger than that of the Earth. The extreme cold, reaching down to minus 230 degrees Celsius, turns common materials brittle and forces the craft to huddle around the meagre warmth of its own radioactive decay. The Jovian moons are scattered across this magnetic wasteland like a chain of desert islands in an infinite dark sea. Here, time is not measured by the rising and falling of a sun that has become a distant needlepoint, but by the slow, grinding dance of tidal forces. Jupiter's massive gravity kneads the interiors of these moons like a baker working dough, creating heat where there should be only ice. On Io, the innermost of the great satellites, this gravitational friction is so intense that the ground itself rises and falls by over 100 feet in a rhythmic tectonic tide. This is a world where time is expressed through the constant eruption of sulphurous volcanoes and the relentless recycling of the crust. It is an island of fire caught in a sea of radiation, a place where a day is defined by the violent rearrangement of the landscape. Further out lies Europa, an island of ice where time is a frozen secret. Beneath a shell of water ice that is miles thick, a dark, saline ocean waits in the absolute silence. Here, the tidal forces are more subtle, providing just enough warmth to keep the water liquid, creating a sanctuary that is entirely disconnected from the light of the sun. On Europa, a year is not a measure of seasons, but a measure of the slow, creeping cracks that form in the ice, a geological clock that ticks once every few centuries. It is a place of profound isolation, where any potential life would exist in a state of eternal night, unaware that stars even exist. The moon is a silent witness to the passage of eons, its surface a pristine white desert that hides the depths of a hidden world. Ganymede and Callisto, the outer giants of the system, are battered witnesses to the history of the cosmos. Their surfaces are scarred by millions of craters, a record of every impact that has occurred over the last 4 billion years. On these worlds, time has effectively stopped. They are islands of ancient history, preserved in the deep freeze of the outer system. To stand on the surface of Callisto is to stand on a world that has looked exactly the same since the very beginning of the sun's reign. It is the ultimate expression of the great emptiness, a place where the concept of change has been abandoned in favour of an eternal, cratered stillness. The Jovian threshold is a place of beautiful, lethal majesty. It is a kingdom where the scale of the planets finally matches the scale of the void itself. But as the traveller looks past the swirling great red spot and the shimmering rings of the king, they see that the journey is far from over. The dark sea continues to stretch outward, toward the golden rings of Saturn and the frozen giants beyond. The 6 to 8 years spent reaching Jupiter were merely the introduction to the true depths of the outer realm, a place where the signal from home begins to decay, and the very concept of a human life feels like a brief, flickering candle in an eternal winter. We have reached the first of the giants, but the horizon remains as distant as ever, and the ocean of time only grows deeper. The leap from Jupiter to Saturn is not a simple step, but a plunge into a deeper, more profound layer of the abyss. While the King of Planets was a monumental destination, the ringed jewel of the solar system lies nearly twice as far from the Sun as its Jovian brother. To bridge this gap, a traveller must surrender more than just a few years. They must commit over a decade of their existence to the unyielding silence of the void. This 10-year transit is a crucible that reshapes the human perception of history. In the time it takes for a spacecraft to fall through the gravitational gradients from one giant to the next, the world that was left behind undergoes a total metamorphosis. On Earth, 10 years is a span of radical transformation. It is the time it takes for a newborn infant to learn to speak, to read, to run, and to begin the long transition into adolescence. It is the time in which a young student becomes a professional, in which grey hair begins to claim the temples of the middle-aged, and in which the elderly pass into memory. Seasons turn 40 times, governments fall and rise, the very landscape of cities is altered by the ceaseless churn of human industry. But for the traveller suspended in the lightless gap between Jupiter and Saturn, these 10 years are a single, frozen moment. The interior of the ship remains unchanged, a sterile and unchanging capsule where the only measure of the passage of time is the digital count of the mission clock. The traveller becomes a ghost haunting a metal corridor, a relic of a decade-old past moving toward an uncertain future. As the ship pushes deeper into the dark, the Sun, the once mighty lord of the sky, is reduced to a brilliant, terrifyingly small needlepoint. It no longer possesses a visible disk. It is merely the brightest star in a sky filled with cold, distant diamonds. Its light, though still intense enough to blind the unprotected eye, has lost its ability to provide warmth. The energy that reaches the hull is a mere hundredth of what was felt on the shores of the home world. The shadows cast by this needlepoint sun are long, sharp, and absolute, cutting through the darkness with a surgical precision. This is the realm of the twilight, where the distinction between day and night has vanished, replaced by an eternal starry dusk. The traveller is no longer a child of the light, but a citizen of the shadows, living in a world where the primary source of heat is the decaying heart of a nuclear generator rather than the fire of a star. The sense of disconnection from the homeworld grows until it becomes a physical ache. The radio signal, which once carried the immediate warmth of human voices, now labours through the void for over an hour to reach its destination. A simple greeting sent from the ship takes 80 minutes to reach the Earth, and the reply takes another 80 minutes to return. This nearly 3-hour delay renders the concept of conversation impossible. Communication becomes a series of monologues, letters sent across a vast, light-speed desert. The traveller realises that they are no longer part of the human story in real time. They are an observer of an old world, receiving news of events that have already passed, of people who have already changed, and of a home that is increasingly alien. The Earth is no longer a blue marble. It is a faint flickering spark, indistinguishable from the other wandering lights of the ecliptic. The arrival at Saturn, when it finally occurs after 10 long years of drifting, is a moment of haunting golden majesty. The planet rises out of the dark like a gargantuan butter-coloured ghost, its rings stretching across the blackness like a frozen sea of shattered moons. These rings are a masterpiece of celestial geometry, trillions of fragments of ice and rock dancing in a perfect flat plane that spans hundreds of thousands of miles. To the traveller who has spent a decade in the featureless void, the sight of Saturn is almost overwhelming, a sudden explosion of form and colour in a universe of nothingness. But the beauty is cold and distant. Saturn is a world of ammonia clouds and screaming winds, a place where the gravity is so immense and the atmosphere so deep that there is no solid ground to stand upon. The 10-year journey has brought the explorer to the edge of the known, but it has also stripped away the last vestiges of their earthly identity. They are now a creature of the outer system, their biological rhythms tuned to the slow orbits of the giants, rather than the rapid spinning of the Earth. They have watched a decade of human history vanish into the signal delay, and they have learned to find a strange, quiet peace in the absolute isolation of the ringed world. The golden glow of Saturn is a reward for a decade of patience, but it is also a reminder of the scale of the prison. Beyond the rings lie the ice giants, Uranus and Neptune, worlds so remote that the journey to reach them will demand the remainder of a human life. The ocean of time is widening, and the light of home is fading into the eternal dark. The passage into the realm of the ice giants is a descent into the ultimate basement of the solar system, a place where the sun's influence is so diluted that it can no longer be felt as heat, only seen as a cold, distant spark. To reach Uranus and Neptune, the traveller must move beyond the golden majesty of Saturn and commit to a transit that spans between 12 and 30 years. This is no longer a voyage of exploration. It is a migration of the soul. A person who departs the earth in the vibrant strength of their youth will arrive at these frozen sentinels as an elder, their hair turned to silver and their memories of the homeworld softened by the sheer, crushing weight of the intervening decades. The ship is no longer a vehicle, but a lifetime, a self-contained world where the only reality is the hum of the machines and the endless, unchanging blackness outside the glass. Uranus appears first, a pale, ghostly orb of Xian hanging in the dark like a forgotten marble. It is a world of profound strangeness, tilted so far upon its side that it seems to roll through its 84-year orbit rather than spin. Here, the atmosphere is a deep, freezing well of hydrogen, helium and methane, where the temperatures drop to levels that challenge the very definition of matter. There is no internal heat to drive the weather, leaving the planet a featureless, silent witness to the passage of eons. The traveller spends years approaching this blue-green spectre, watching it grow from a point of light into a massive, chilling presence that offers no solid ground and no shelter. It is a sentinel of the deep, guarding the approach to the final frontier of the sun's kingdom. Beyond Uranus lies Neptune, the most distant of the great worlds, reached only after 3 decades of relentless falling through the void. Neptune is a world of royal blue, a violent and turbulent giant where supersonic winds scream through the methane clouds at over 1,000 miles per hour. It is a place of primal energy, driven by a mysterious internal heat that defies the freezing environment of the outer system. The great dark spot, a storm the size of the Earth, wanders across the face of the planet like a bruise on the skin of a god. To reach this deep blue horizon is to stand at the very edge of the abyss, where the sun is nothing more than a brilliant needlepoint that provides no more light than a full moon on a terrestrial night. At these staggering distances, the very nature of reality begins to unravel through the phenomenon of the light hour. We are accustomed to a world where cause and effect are instantaneous, where a word spoken is a word heard, but at the orbit of Neptune, the traveller is separated from the Earth by 4 light hours of distance. This means that light itself, the fastest messenger in the universe, requires 4 hours to bridge the gap. If the traveller were to send a cry for help, a desperate signal across the void, it would take 4 hours to reach the ears of the technicians on Earth. Those technicians would then require time to deliberate, and their reply would take another 4 hours to return. In a moment of crisis, the traveller is trapped in an 8-hour silence, a period where causality itself feels stretched and thin. This delay is the ultimate expression of the isolation of the deep. To live at the edge of the ice giants is to live in the past. Every image received from the Earth is 4 hours old. Every piece of news is a ghost of an event that has already been resolved or forgotten. The traveller is disconnected from the now of the human species, existing in a private bubble of time that is out of sync with the rest of existence. If the ship were to suffer a catastrophic failure, the Earth would not even know of the disaster until hours after the crew had already vanished into the dark. This is the agony of the signal delay, the realization that you are truly alone, beyond the reach of any rescue, and that your life is governed by a clock that no longer matches the rhythm of your home. The ice giants are the frozen sentinels of the dark, marking the boundary between the Sun's family and the infinite wilderness of the interstellar void. They are worlds of ice and shadow, where the laws of chemistry and physics are pushed to their extremes. To have reached them is to have survived a journey that consumes the better part of a human life, a crossing that requires a level of patience that borders on the divine. The traveller looks back toward the Sun and sees only a bright star, indistinguishable from the others, and realizes that the blue marble of Earth is now a myth, a story from a previous incarnation. Ahead lies the Kuiper Belt and the final lonely outpost of Pluto, where the ocean of time becomes an eternal frozen sea and the last traces of the Sun's warmth finally flicker and die. The final outpost of the Sun's immediate family is a world of nitrogen ice and red tholins, a small heart-shaped frontier known as Pluto. To reach this distant shore, the New Horizons probe, the fastest object ever launched from the Earth at that moment, had to hurtle through the dark for 9 long years. Even at speeds exceeding 30,000 miles per hour, the craft required nearly a decade to bridge the gap to the Kuiper Belt. This is the ultimate backyard of our solar system, a vast, dark disk of icy remnants and frozen time that stretches far beyond the orbits of the giants. In the time it took for that small robotic emissary to reach its target, a child on Earth would have grown from their first steps to the threshold of adolescence. For a human traveller, this journey represents the total consumption of a life's prime. One would depart in the full vigour of their 34th year and arrive with the greying hair and weathered spirit of their 43rd, having spent the entirety of their middle age in a windowless room suspended in nothingness. This gruelling duration is the direct result of the inherent limitations of chemical propulsion. Our current rockets, though they represent the pinnacle of industrial engineering, are essentially sophisticated ways of burning refined kerosene or liquid hydrogen to throw mass out of a nozzle. We are limited by the energy contained within chemical bonds, a finite and relatively meagre source of power when measured against the scale of the abyss. To reach the edge of our own solar neighbourhood using these methods is to hit a wall of biological reality. We cannot carry enough fuel to go much faster, and we cannot live long enough to go much slower. We are a species of short-lived creatures attempting to navigate a universe that operates on a geological and stellar timescale, and our chemical engines are simply too weak to bridge the gap between our mortality and the stars. Yet, on the horizon of our technical ambition, new methods of crossing the deep are beginning to take shape. We look toward the theoretical potential of nuclear thermal rockets, which would use the terrifying power of the split atom to heat a propellant to extreme temperatures, doubling or tripling the efficiency of our current engines. Such a vessel could turn a 9-year odyssey to Pluto into a transit of perhaps 3 years, bringing the outer solar system within the reach of a single human mission. Beyond even the power of the atom lies the elegant promise of the light sail, vast, shimmering membranes of gossamer-thin material that do not carry fuel at all. Instead, they catch the relentless pressure of photons from the Sun or from massive Earth-based lasers, accelerating continuously for months on end. A light sail could, in theory, reach speeds that are a significant fraction of the velocity of light itself, turning decades into years and years into mere months. However, there is a profound and haunting irony in our quest for speed. As we develop the technologies to move faster through the void, the universe does not seem to shrink. Instead, it only seems to grow more vast. Every increase in our velocity allows us to see further into the dark, revealing that the Kuiper Belt is not the end, but merely the beginning of a much larger structure called the Oort cloud, a spherical shell of trillions of comets that extends halfway to the nearest star. We find that the more we learn about the scale of the cosmos, the more we realize that our fastest crafts are still crawling like ants across a continent. We are refining our ability to measure the light hour and the light day, only to find that the distances are measured in light years and centuries. The faster we travel, the more we become aware of the sheer volume of the emptiness that surrounds us. We are moving from the era of the chemical rocket into the era of the nuclear and the photonic, but the fundamental problem remains the same. Time is the one resource we cannot manufacture. Even if we could travel at half the speed of light, the journey to the nearest star system would still take nearly a decade of subjective time. We are realizing that to be a spacefaring species is to be a species that accepts the permanent loss of the present. To go faster is merely to see more of the horizon, and the horizon is a line that never stops receding. We are standing at the edge of the Kuiper Belt looking out into the interstellar night, realizing that the solar system was merely the shallow water at the edge of an infinite and timeless ocean. The journey has only just begun, and the dark that lies ahead is deeper than anything we have yet dared to cross. The observer at the observation port is no longer the vibrant youth who watched the sapphire of the homeworld dissolve into the velvet throat of the abyss. The decades have etched a complex topography across the observer's brow, a map of years spent in the company of the stars. The hair is now the colour of lunar dust, and the hands, once steady with the excitement of departure, are now thin and translucent, the skin like parchment that has been dried by the radiation of a dozen different suns. The sun itself, the once mighty sovereign of the sky, has finally surrendered its crown, becoming indistinguishable from the billions of other flickering embers that populate the infinite night. In this high-latitude territory of the cosmos, the traveller has become an old soul, a living relic of a world that has likely forgotten their name. The ticking of the mechanical clock, once a source of claustrophobic anxiety, has become the only familiar heartbeat in a universe that does not breathe. It is a rhythmic, defiant sound that asserts the presence of the human, even in the face of the crushing weight of the eons. To have travelled this far is to have witnessed the true nature of time, not as a linear progression of days and weeks, but as a vast, unyielding pressure that shapes the destiny of galaxies. The observer looks out at the eternal horizon and realizes that the journey was never truly about the destination. It was about the act of endurance itself, the willingness to exist in the gap between the fleeting and the eternal. A profound question lingers in the silence of the cabin. Why does a species whose life is but a brief flash of lightning in the dark bother to make these journeys at all? We are creatures of 80 or 90 years, brief and fragile, yet we reach out toward worlds that require decades to visit, and stars that require centuries to understand. The answer lies in the unique and terrifying burden of our consciousness. We are the only part of the universe that has developed eyes to see itself and a mind to measure its own insignificance. To stay bound to the homeworld would be to accept the limitations of our biology, but to travel into the deep is to forge a bridge between our fleeting existence and the eternal endurance of the stars. This bridge is built of courage and curiosity, but its primary material is time. Every year spent in the dark, every decade of isolation, and every century of signal delay is a payment made toward the survival of the human spirit. By casting ourselves into the void, we are refusing to be a footnote in the history of a single planet. We are attempting to weave our short, frantic lives into the grand, slow tapestry of the cosmos. The traveller realizes that while their own body has aged and withered, the knowledge they have gathered, the sights they have seen, and the very fact of their presence in the deep will outlast the mountains of the earth. We are the architects of a legacy that is measured not in monuments of stone, but in trajectories of light. The observer watches as a distant nebula, a nursery of stars, glows with a soft, haunting violet light. It is a reminder that the universe is constantly birthing new worlds, even as the old ones grow cold. The act of space travel is our way of participating in this cosmic cycle. We are the seeds of the earth scattered by the winds of technology, moving toward a future that we will never see, for the benefit of a species we will never meet. The isolation of the journey is the price of this transcendence. To be an explorer of the deep is to accept that you are a ghost of the future, a bridge that allows the consciousness of the home world to span the gulfs between the suns. The weight of the abyss no longer feels heavy to the old soul at the window. It feels like a homecoming. The fear of the dark has been replaced by a quiet, meditative awe. The traveller understands that they are not a stranger in this emptiness. They are a part of it, composed of the same ancient atoms that were forged in the hearts of the first stars. The distance to the horizon is no longer a measure of despair, but a measure of the infinite potential of the mind to reach beyond itself. We have learned to measure our courage not by the speed of our engines, but by how long we are willing to wait in the dark to see a new sunrise on a world that does not yet know our name. The final frame of this long, silent odyssey reveals the vessel as a microscopic speck against the backdrop of 1,000 galaxies. It is a tiny, fragile spark of consciousness moving slowly through an infinite, timeless sea. There is no sound here, no wind to catch a sail, and no ground to provide an anchor. There is only the steady, rhythmic pulse of the clock and the unwavering light of the distant stars. The ship drifts forward, a solitary light in a desert of shadows, carrying the memories of a blue world into the heart of the eternal night. We are the mariners of the void, the children of the light, moving forever toward a horizon that promises nothing but the truth of our own endurance. The journey continues, silent and sublime, as the spark moves deeper into the great, beautiful and terrifying unknown.